Behind the golden gates of a mansion, a millionaire boy cried silently, invisible even to his own family. Everything changed when a poor girl knocked on the door, asking only for a glass of water. She saw what no one had ever noticed, the sadness hidden in his eyes. If this beautiful story of overcoming and love interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us which city you are watching us from. The December sun blazed down on the streets of Beverly Hills in Los Angeles, but inside the Fletcher mansion, the air conditioning kept everything perfectly cool. The Carrara marble walls reflected the light that streamed through the enormous bulletproof windows, creating an environment that resembled a museum more than a home. On the third floor, in a bedroom larger than many entire houses, Ryan Anderson Fletcher hid behind Italian silk curtains, watching the movement on the street through the tinted glass. At 8 years old, Ryan had everything a child could materially desire. His room was equipped with the latest video game consoles imported from Japan, a 75-inch television, a bookshelf filled with toys he'd never touched, and designer clothes that cost more than the monthly salary of many American families. His meals were prepared by a French chef, hired specifically to cater to the refined palates of the family, and he had an English governess who spoke 4 languages and had worked for European royalty. But none of this mattered when Ryan locked himself in the pink marble bathroom of his bedroom and cried. He cried until he had no more tears, until his eyes burned, until his breathing became labored and painful. These were silent, controlled tears, because from an early age he had learned that showing weakness in the Fletcher family was unacceptable. His father, Edward Anderson Fletcher, owner of one of the largest construction companies in the country, always said that real men don't cry, even when that man was still just a child lost amid luxury. Ryan's routine was mathematically precise. He woke at 7 in the morning with his governess, Mrs. Patterson, a 50-year-old woman with a heavy accent and a perpetually serious expression. He ate breakfast alone at the mahogany table that seated 12, while his parents had already left for their morning engagements. Edward usually left at 5:30 in the morning for business meetings, and Heather, his mother, rarely appeared before 10, always in a hurry for some charity event or spa session with her friends from Los Angeles high society. After breakfast came private lessons. English teacher at 9, mathematics at 10, language arts at 11. In the afternoon, swimming in the Olympic-sized pool at the back of the mansion, tennis on the private court, and piano lessons in the main salon. Ryan executed everything with mechanical perfection, as if he were a robot programmed to be the ideal son. His grades were impeccable, his posture irreproachable, his clothes always perfectly aligned. But inside something was breaking a little more each day. What hurt the most was the indifference. When Edward arrived home around 9 at night, he greeted his son with a distant nod and asked about his school grades. Heather, when present, limited herself to checking if he was well dressed and had behaved appropriately during the day. Love, affection, hugs, intimate conversations were foreign concepts in that house of 20 bedrooms and 8 bathrooms. Ryan's solitude was inhabited only by the servants who moved through the mansion like efficient shadows. Mrs. Carmen, the 60-year-old cook from Louisiana, was perhaps the only one who showed any genuine tenderness, always leaving a special sweet in the boy's room or asking if he had enjoyed lunch. But even she maintained a respectful distance, knowing that intimacies between employers and employees were discouraged by the family. It was a particularly hot December afternoon when Ryan decided he couldn't bear to stay in his room watching Japanese cartoons with English subtitles anymore. He went down to the ground floor and walked through the cold marble corridors until he reached the library, a solemn environment with noble wood shelves that extended from floor to ceiling. Thousands of leather-bound books occupied the shelves, but Ryan knew that most were there just to impress visitors. His parents weren't readers. They were people of action, of business, of practical results. He sat in one of the red leather armchairs and picked up a book at random. It was a classic American novel, The Grapes of Wrath by John Steinbeck. He opened to the first page, but the words seemed to dance before his tired eyes, exhausted from so much crying. He closed the book and leaned his head against the back of the armchair, feeling the weight of loneliness pressing on his small chest. That's when he heard voices coming from his father's office. Edward was in a video conference with Japanese investors discussing the construction of a new business complex on Wilshire Boulevard. His voice was firm, decisive, full of authority and passion for business. Ryan spent a few minutes listening to that conversation, fascinated to see his father showing so much emotion and involvement in something. When was the last time Edward had spoken to him with half that enthusiasm? He got up from the armchair and walked to the library window, which overlooked the gardens impeccably maintained by a team of 6 gardeners. The lawn was perfectly trimmed, the flowers arranged in precise geometric patterns, the trees artistically pruned. Everything very beautiful, very organized, very cold. Ryan rested his forehead against the glass and felt the cold surface against his skin, hot with emotional fever. Outside, beyond the high walls of the property, he could see pieces of real life. Cars passing on the street, people walking on sidewalks, children playing in neighboring house gardens. A world that seemed so physically close, yet infinitely distant from his golden and solitary reality. Ryan closed his eyes and made a silent wish to the universe. Something an 8-year-old child shouldn't need to ask for. That someone, anyone, would notice that he existed beyond the perfect grades and exemplary behavior. At that moment, Mrs. Patterson entered the library with her characteristic erect posture and informed him that it was time for his piano lesson. Ryan obediently nodded and followed her to the salon, where the Steinway grand piano awaited him like a black and silent giant. He sat on the padded bench and began to play the piece he had been practicing for weeks, Fur-Elise by Beethoven. His small hands moved across the keys with impeccable technical precision, but without soul, without passion, as if he were an automatic mechanism reproducing sounds. As he played, tears began to silently roll down his face. The music came out perfect but empty, exactly how he felt inside. Mrs. Patterson, sitting in a nearby chair correcting English exercises, didn't notice or pretended not to notice the boy's suffering. The sound of the piano echoed through the empty salon, mixing with the distant noise of the air conditioning and the activities of the employees in other parts of the mansion. When he finished the piece, Ryan remained seated at the piano for a few moments, his hands still resting on the keys. He looked through the salon window and saw that the sun was already setting, tinting the sky with orange and pink hues. In a few hours his parents would return home, dine in the habitual silence of the formal dining room, and he would go up to his room for another night of loneliness disguised as luxury. Mrs. Patterson stood up and announced that it was time for dinner. Ryan followed her to the dining room, where a place was set at the head of the immense table. He sat alone and was served by 2 uniformed waiters who worked in respectful silence. The dinner was sophisticated, grilled salmon with asparagus and porcini mushroom risotto, accompanied by an imported French grape juice. He ate mechanically without savoring, just fulfilling another stage of the routine that defined his existence. After dinner, he went up to his room and prepared for bed. Mrs. Patterson came to say good night, checked if he had brushed his teeth and was wearing the appropriate pajamas, then turned off the lights and closed the door. Ryan was left alone in the dark, lying in his king-size bed with Egyptian cotton sheets, listening to the muffled sounds of the mansion preparing for the night. Somewhere distant, he could hear the television in his parents' bedroom and sporadic conversations of the employees saying goodbye after another day of work. He turned on his side and hugged one of the pillows, pretending it was a person who cared about him. He closed his eyes tightly, trying not to think about the loneliness that consumed him inside, trying not to wonder why he felt so invisible in a house where he was theoretically the most important person. Sleep was slow to come, as always, and when it finally arrived, it brought confused dreams where he ran through infinite corridors looking for someone he could never find. On the other side of the city, in East Los Angeles, Isabella Sanders woke every day at 5 in the morning to the sound of the first buses passing on the avenue near the small shack where she lived with her mother, Connie. The sun hadn't completely risen yet, but she could already hear the neighbors moving about, preparing for another day of struggle for survival in the Los Angeles periphery. The smell of coffee filtered through cloth came from the tiny kitchen, mixed with the aroma of fresh bread that her mother bought from the corner store whenever there was enough money. Isabella was 8 years old, the same age as Ryan, but she seemed to carry on her shoulders the weight of a responsibility much greater than her age. Her brown eyes shone with an intelligence and maturity that caught the attention of all who knew her. Despite her simple clothes, always clean but mended in several places, she maintained a dignified posture and a smile that could illuminate the darkest corners of the community where she lived. The Sanders family's shack had 2 small rooms, one bedroom that simultaneously served as living room, kitchen and sleeping area for Connie, and a small corner in the back that Isabella called my room. Although it was just a space delimited by a colorful plastic curtain, there was no real floor, just hard-packed earth covered by some pieces of linoleum that Connie had managed to get from a construction site where she had worked as a cleaner. The walls were made of plywood and metal sheets, and when it rained hard, some leaks dripped into strategically positioned buckets around the house. But for Isabella, that place was the whole world. There was her mother, the most important person in her life, the woman who worked 16 hours a day to ensure that her daughter had food, clean clothes, and could attend the public school in the neighborhood. Connie, at 32, looked 45. Her hands were calloused from scrubbing floors and washing clothes, her face marked by tiredness and constant worry, but her eyes were always sweet when she looked at Isabella, always full of unconditional hope and love. That particularly hot and stuffy December morning, Connie left early to work in the house of a rich family in Brentwood. It was her 3rd job of the week. Monday and Tuesday she cleaned an office in downtown. Wednesday and Thursday she worked as a day cleaner in 2 different houses. And Friday through Sunday she did extra cleaning jobs wherever she could. She left Isabella with the neighbor, Mrs. Nora, a 70-year-old woman who took care of the community's children when mothers needed to work. Isabella spent the morning helping Mrs. Nora make snacks to sell at the Saturday fair that took place at the community center. Her small hands shaped chicken croquettes and raindrop cookies with impressive skill for her age. As she worked, she chatted animatedly with the neighbor about her dreams and plans for the future. She wanted to be a teacher, she said, to help other children learn to read and write. Or maybe a doctor, to take care of sick people in the community. Or a lawyer to defend the rights of the poor like her mother. Mrs. Nora smiled, hearing those grand dreams coming from the mouth of such a small girl, but at the same time was moved by the determination and hope that Isabella demonstrated. "You'll go far, my child," she always said. "God gave you a good head, and with study, there's no dream that can't come true." These words were like seeds planted in Isabella's heart, nurturing her will to grow and succeed in life despite all the difficulties. In the afternoon, when the sun was stronger, Isabella said goodbye to Mrs. Nora and went out to walk around the neighborhood. She liked to observe people, to greet neighbors, to play with other children she met along the way. She didn't have expensive or electronic toys, but her imagination was fertile, and she could transform any object into a source of fun. A piece of wood became a car. Colored pebbles turned into pieces of a game she invented herself, and the drawings she made with borrowed colored pencils were true works of art in her childish eyes. That specific afternoon, Isabella felt an intense thirst. The heat was unbearable, and the only community faucet that worked had broken the day before. Some neighbors had organized to buy mineral water, but the Sanders family didn't have extra money for that. Connie had left only a few coins for Isabella to buy bread at the end of the day, and the girl knew she couldn't spend that money on anything else, so she decided to do something she rarely did: leave the known limits of her neighborhood and seek help in other places. She walked down the main avenue, barefoot because her only shoes were saved for school and Sundays, when she went to church with her mother. The asphalt burned her feet, but she was used to these small pains that were part of the routine of being born poor in America. She passed by several houses, some simple like hers, others a little better, with iron gates and small gardens. At all those where she stopped, she offered to help with some household chore in exchange for a glass of water. Her education and gentleness impressed people, but most didn't need help or didn't have time to talk with an unknown child. She continued walking, driven by thirst and curiosity to know different places. It was then that she reached a region she had never visited: Beverly Hills. The houses there were huge, with gardens that looked like parks, imported cars in the garages, and high walls that hid entire worlds behind them. Isabella walked slowly, observing everything with wide eyes. She had never seen so much wealth gathered in one place. She stopped in front of a particularly imposing mansion. The walls were of light stone, with wrought iron details that formed artistic designs. Through the partially open gate, she could see pieces of a garden that seemed to have come out of a decoration magazine. There was a fountain in the middle of the lawn, with crystal-clear water running in cascade, and Isabella felt her thirst intensify at the sight of so much clean, fresh water being wasted just for decoration. She approached the intercom with shyness. Her sweaty hands trembled a little when she pressed the button. A male voice, serious and impatient, answered on the other end. Isabella politely explained that she was thirsty and asked if she could have some water. The answer was dry. "We don't give handouts. Look for the appropriate agencies." And the intercom went off with a definitive click. Isabella wasn't upset. She was used to rejections and knew that not everyone could or wanted to help. She continued walking down the street, observing other equally impressive mansions. She stopped in front of some, but didn't even bother to ring the bell, realizing from the closed gates and formal atmosphere that she wouldn't be well received. That's when she arrived in front of the Fletcher mansion. Something about that house caught her attention in a different way. Perhaps it was the fact that there was an open window on the third floor, or perhaps it was just childish intuition, but Isabella felt that there she could find a different answer. She approached the wrought iron gate and rang the bell once, then waited patiently. No one answered in the first few minutes. She was about to give up and continue her walk when she heard hurried footsteps coming from inside the property. They were light footsteps, a child's, quickly descending stairs. Isabella frowned, curious. What child would that be? And why was it running that way? The gate opened slowly, and she found herself face to face with a boy her age. She was immediately impressed with his clothes, an expensive brand polo shirt, tailored shorts and imported sneakers that cost more than her mother earned in 2 months. But what most caught her attention were the boy's eyes. They were red and swollen, as if he had cried a lot recently. Ryan looked at Isabella with curiosity and surprise. He had never seen a child so different from his world. The bare feet, the simple but clean clothes, the hair tied with a common elastic, the bright eyes despite the evident poverty. But there was something in her posture, in the way she greeted him politely, that immediately caught his attention. "Sorry to bother you," Isabella said in a sweet but firm voice. "I was passing by and felt very thirsty. Could you give me a little water, please? I can help with something in return if you want. I know how to sweep, organize, wash dishes." Ryan stood for a few seconds, not knowing what to answer. No one had ever asked him for help before. He was always the one who received things, never the one who gave. And there was something in the simplicity of that request that touched him deeply. He nodded and gestured for her to enter. Isabella hesitated for a moment. The garden that opened before her was more beautiful and well-kept than any park she had ever visited. The lawn looked like a perfect green carpet. The flowers were arranged in colorful patterns that formed geometric designs, and in the background she could see a house that looked more like a movie palace. She felt small and out of place, but thirst spoke louder than shyness. She followed Ryan along a Portuguese stone path that led to a leisure area at the back of the house. There was a huge pool, bigger than her entire house, with crystalline blue water that reflected the afternoon sun. Next to the pool, a garden table with upholstered chairs and a parasol that provided inviting shade. Ryan indicated one of the chairs and disappeared through a side door of the house. Isabella sat on the edge of the chair, afraid to soil the light fabric with her simple clothes. She looked around in fascination. There were so many beautiful things that she didn't know where to focus her gaze. The house was even bigger than she had imagined, with huge windows that allowed her to see pieces of luxurious environments inside. Everything there exuded wealth and comfort, a world completely different from anything she knew. Ryan returned a few minutes later, carrying a silver tray with a crystal glass full of ice-cold water and a plate with imported cookies. He carefully placed everything on the table and sat in the chair beside her. Isabella thanked him sincerely and drank the water slowly, savoring each sip as if it were the most precious of liquids. It was then that she noticed again the boy's red eyes. There was a deep sadness in that look that completely contrasted with all the luxury that surrounded him. Isabella, with her natural sensitivity to perceive people's feelings, felt that something was wrong there. That rich boy, surrounded by everything money could buy, seemed as lonely as she felt sometimes when her mother worked late and she stayed alone in the shack. "You seem sad," she said with simplicity, without malice or indiscreet curiosity, just with the sincerity of one who genuinely cares about others. Did something bad happen? Ryan was surprised by the question. No one had ever asked him about his feelings. Mrs. Patterson worried about his school assignments. The employees made sure he was well dressed and fed. His parents controlled his behavior and his grades. But no one, absolutely no one, had noticed that he was suffering inside. He lowered his eyes and remained silent for a few seconds, not knowing how to respond. How to explain to a poor girl that he, having everything, felt empty. How to talk about loneliness to someone who probably knew much more concrete and urgent needs. But there was something in Isabella's eyes, a genuine warmth, that encouraged him to open up for the first time in his life. I feel alone, he confessed softly, as if he were sharing the biggest secret in the world. My parents work a lot and almost never stay at home. When they're here, they don't seem to really see me. It's like I'm invisible, you know? Like it only matters when I get good grades or behave properly. Isabella listened to every word with complete attention. She didn't interrupt, didn't judge, didn't try to minimize his pain. She just listened, with an open heart and the natural understanding of someone who also knew in a different way the weight of loneliness. When Ryan finished speaking, she remained silent for a few respectful minutes, processing what she had heard. Then, with a delicate movement, she took from her shorts pocket a small piece of paper folded several times. It was a simple drawing, made with colored pencils, a small house with two figures holding hands in front, surrounded by flowers and a smiling sun. The paper was a bit crumpled and the colors somewhat faded, but the image radiated joy and hope. I draw this whenever I feel sad, she explained, handing the paper to Ryan. It's my mom and me in our house. When I look at this drawing, I remember that it doesn't matter if our house is small or if we don't have much money. What matters is that we have each other. Maybe it will work for you too. Maybe you just need to remember that there's always someone who cares even when it seems like there isn't. Ryan took the drawing carefully, as if it were made of the most delicate material in the world. He looked at that simple representation of love and family, and for the first time in weeks, he felt a genuine smile form on his lips. It wasn't a forced smile to please adults or to look good in photos. It was a real smile, born from the depths of his heart that illuminated his entire face. And Isabella, seeing that transformation, smiled too. At that moment, under the shade of the expensive parasol, two children from completely different worlds discovered that the pain of loneliness knows no social class, and that the cure for that pain can come from the most unexpected places. Edward Anderson Fletcher arrived home that afternoon earlier than usual. An important meeting had been cancelled at the last minute, and he decided to take advantage of the free time to review some contracts in the comfort of his private office. He went straight up to the second floor, where his personal sanctuary was located, a spacious room with mahogany shelves filled with books on business administration and economics, an imposing executive desk, and a genuine Italian leather armchair where he used to take refuge from the world. He was focused on analyzing the clauses of a contract for the construction of a shopping mall when an unusual sound caught his attention. It was a laugh, a genuine childish giggle, spontaneous, full of joy. Edward frowned, confused. He hadn't heard his son laugh like that in months, perhaps years. He got up from the chair and walked to the window that overlooked the gardens at the back of the property. What he saw left him completely perplexed. Ryan was sitting on the grass by the pool, talking animatedly with a girl who clearly didn't belong to his social circle. The child was barefoot. Her clothes were simple and mended, and her hair was tied with a common elastic from a drugstore. But what most impressed Edward was his son's expression. Ryan was radiant, with eyes shining in a way he hadn't seen in a long time. The two were playing with twigs and pebbles, creating some kind of imaginary game on the perfectly trimmed lawn. Isabella was explaining the rules with animated gestures, and Ryan was listening with complete attention, enthusiastically participating in each stage of the game. It was as if a different child had taken the place of the melancholic and distant boy that Edward knew. Edward remained at the window for several minutes, observing the interaction between the two children. He saw when Isabella taught Ryan how to make bracelets with braided grass, a skill she had learned from the other children in the neighborhood. He saw when Ryan showed her the different flowers in the garden, explaining the names he had memorized during his botany classes. He saw when the two ran across the lawn chasing butterflies, their laughter echoing through the afternoon air. But what impressed him most was the naturalness with which they interacted. There was no hierarchy, no formality, none of the tension that always existed when Ryan was in the presence of adults. It was simply two children being children, sharing the purity of true friendship. Edward realized that he had never seen his son interact this way with anyone, not even with the children of friend families who occasionally visited the mansion. When the sun began to set, Edward saw Isabella get up and make a gesture to say goodbye. Ryan held her hand, clearly not wanting her to leave. They talked for a few minutes, and Edward could tell from the body language that they were arranging to meet again. Finally, Isabella waved to Ryan and walked toward the gate, her bare feet stepping delicately on the stones of the path. Edward quickly went down the stairs, crossed the entrance hall and reached Isabella before she got to the gate. The girl was a little startled to see that tall and imposing man, dressed in an expensive suit and serious expression, but maintained her polite and respectful posture. "Good afternoon, sir," she greeted him with a small bow. "Thank you for letting me play with Ryan. He is very kind." Edward stood for a few seconds, not knowing what to say. He was used to dealing with businessmen, investors, politicians, people who spoke the language of business and power. But that small girl, with her genuine simplicity and natural education, completely disarmed him. "What's your name?" he asked, trying to soften the tone of voice he used to use in executive meetings. "Isabella Sanders, sir. I live in East Los Angeles with my mother, Connie." "You're Mr. Edward, right? Ryan told me that you build houses and big buildings." Edward nodded, impressed with the girl's articulation and with the fact that she already knew his name and profession. "And what did you do with my son? It's been months since I've seen him smile like that." Isabella tilted her head to the side, thoughtful. "I just listened to him, sir. I think he needed someone to pay attention to what he was feeling, not just what he was doing. Sometimes we just need company, right? Someone who likes us the way we are." These simple words hit Edward like a punch to the stomach. An 8-year-old child from the periphery had just summed up in 2 sentences something that he, with all his university education and life experience, had never understood about his own son. Ryan didn't need more toys, more private lessons, or more academic achievements. He needed genuine attention, affection, someone who was interested in his feelings. "Can you come back tomorrow?" Edward asked impulsively, surprising himself. Ryan seemed very happy today. Isabella's eyes lit up. "Yes, sir. My mum only comes back from work at night, and Mrs. Nora, who takes care of me, said I can walk around in the afternoon as long as I don't get into trouble." "And there's no trouble here, just tranquility." Edward smiled for the first time in days. "Then it's settled, and Isabella, thank you for what you did for my son today." Isabella smiled back, waved and left walking down the street, her bare feet making a soft sound on the still warm asphalt. Edward watched her walk away until she disappeared around a corner, then went back inside the house with his mind buzzing with contradictory thoughts. He found Ryan in the garden, still sitting in the spot where he had played with Isabella, holding the drawing she had given him. The boy was looking at the paper with an expression of contentment that Edward hadn't seen in a long time. "Dad!" exclaimed Ryan upon seeing Edward approach, and for the first time in years there was genuine joy in that exclamation. "Did you meet Isabella? She's my new friend. She knows how to do a lot of interesting things, and taught me how to play with twigs, and she draws very well. Look." Edward sat on the grass beside his son, something he had never done before. The expensive suit got dirty with the damp earth of the garden, but at that moment it didn't matter. "Tell me about your friend," he said, genuinely interested. Ryan began to talk enthusiastically about Isabella. He told how she lived far away, that her mother worked hard to support the family, that she was very intelligent and knew things he had never learned, despite all his private lessons. He talked about how she had listened to him when he told her about his loneliness, about how she hadn't judged or tried to give adult advice, just offered her friendship and understanding. As he listened, Edward realized that he was discovering a side of his son that he completely unknown. Ryan was articulate, observant, sensitive. He had his own opinions and deep feelings. How had he spent so much time without realizing this? How had he been content to know only the exemplary son with perfect grades, completely ignoring the real child that existed behind this facade. That night during dinner, Heather noticed something different in the family environment. Ryan was more talkative than usual, telling about his afternoon and about the new friend he had made. Heather listened with distracted politeness, more concerned with the charity event she would organize the following week than with the childish stories of her son. "Is this girl from any family we know?" she asked when Ryan paused to drink water. "She lives in East Los Angeles," Edward answered before Ryan could speak. "Her mother works as a house cleaner." Heather frowned. "East Los Angeles?" "Edward, don't you think it's dangerous to let our son play with children of dubious origin? We don't know what kind of education this girl received, what values—" "She received the education that matters," interrupted Edward, surprising his wife with the firmness in his voice. "Education of the heart. She taught our son something that we, with all our money and status, couldn't teach: how to be happy." Heather remained silent, not accustomed to this decisive tone from her husband when it came to family matters. Edward normally left all decisions about Ryan to her and to Mrs. Patterson, but there was something different in his eyes that night, a determination that she didn't recognize. After dinner, Edward went to Ryan's room to say goodnight, another habit he had abandoned years ago. He found his son lying in bed but awake, staring fixedly at Isabella's drawing that he had taped to the wall next to the headboard. "Dad," said Ryan when Edward sat on the edge of the bed, "can I ask a question?" "Of course, son. Anything you want. Why is Isabella so different from other children I know? She doesn't have anything that I have, but she seems happier than I've ever been." Edward thought carefully before answering. It was a deep question, which touched on the core of complex social and existential issues. But Ryan deserved an honest answer. "Sometimes," he said, choosing his words carefully, "people who have fewer material things learn to value more the things that really matter, like love, friendship, companionship. Isabella knows that her mother works hard for her, so she values every moment they spend together. Maybe we've gotten a bit lost in the midst of so many things and forgotten to value what's essential." "What is essential, Dad?" Edward looked into his son's eyes and felt a deep emotion rising in his chest. "You are essential, Ryan, not your grades, not your exemplary behavior, not your achievements. You, the child who laughs when playing on the grass, who cares about others' feelings, who has a generous heart. That's the most important part of you, and it took me too long to realize that." Ryan smiled, and Edward saw tears beginning to form in the boy's eyes. But this time they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of relief, of understanding, of an emotional connection that father and son had never shared before. Edward kissed Ryan's forehead, wished him good night, and left the room with his heart full of a strange sensation. It was remorse mixed with hope, guilt mixed with determination. For the first time in his life, he felt that he really knew his son, and he was determined not to lose any more moments of Ryan's childhood, not to waste any more opportunities to build a true relationship with him. That night, before going to bed, Edward made a decision that would change not only his life, but the destiny of the entire Fletcher family. He decided that he would learn from Isabella Sanders, an 8-year-old girl from the periphery of Los Angeles, something that all the business schools in the world hadn't been able to teach him. That real success is not measured by numbers in a bank account, but by the ability to make the people we love feel truly loved. In the days that followed, Isabella's presence in the Fletcher mansion became an expected and desired routine, especially for Ryan, who began to count the hours until the moment she would arrive for their afternoons of play. Always around 2 in the afternoon, when the sun was strongest and the house plunged into the silence of the post-lunch period, the sound of the bell announced the arrival of the girl who had brought color to the life of the rich and lonely boy. Edward had instructed all the employees to treat Isabella with the same respect given to any illustrious visitor of the family. Mrs. Carmen, the Louisiana cook, was the one who most quickly became fond of the girl. She saw in her something familiar, a simplicity and sweetness that reminded her of the children from her hometown. She always prepared a special snack for the 2 little ones, natural sandwiches, fresh juices, and sometimes some homemade cookies that made Isabella's eyes shine with joy. Mrs. Patterson, on the other hand, maintained an attitude of polite but distant reserve. She didn't openly disapprove of Isabella's presence, but her discomfort with that break in the well-established routine of the house was visible. She observed the children's games from a distance, always alert to ensure that the activities didn't interfere with Ryan's private lesson schedules. One afternoon, about a week after their first meeting, Isabella arrived at the mansion with a small novelty, a cloth doll handmade by her mother during the few free hours she had. The doll had nothing special in the eyes of those who were accustomed to expensive toys. It was simple. Made with fabric scraps and cotton filling, the eyes were uneven buttons, and the hair was frayed strands of yellow wool. "This is Hope," Isabella presented with pride, holding the doll with affection. "My mom made her for me last Christmas. She said that every child needs to have someone to talk to when they're sad or afraid." Ryan observed the doll with genuine fascination. He had never seen a handmade toy, created with so much love and dedication. All his toys came from expensive stores, too perfect, too cold. There was something special about that imperfect doll that touched him deeply. "She's very beautiful," he said sincerely. "Your mom must love you very much to make something so special." Isabella smiled. But Edward, who was discreetly observing the scene from the library window, noticed a shadow of sadness passing through the girl's eyes. She hugged the doll tighter and remained silent for a few seconds before answering. "My mom loves me very much, that's true, but sometimes I worry about her. She works so much that when she gets home she can barely stand. Yesterday she fell asleep in the kitchen chair because she didn't have the strength to go to bed." Ryan felt a tightening in his heart. For the first time in his life, he was being confronted with the reality of financial difficulties that afflicted millions of American families. His childish perspective, until then limited to the universe of comfort and abundance, was beginning to expand to understand other forms of existence. "What does your mom do?" he asked, genuinely curious. Isabella explained that Connie worked as a house cleaner in several homes, cleaning, washing clothes, organizing closets. She also did extra cleaning in offices during weekends. Edward, listening to the conversation, mentally calculated that the woman must work at least 12 hours a day, 6 days a week, to get the money needed to maintain the house and take care of her daughter. "Do you know what I want most when I grow up?" asked Isabella, changing the subject with the typical naturalness of children. "I want to work a lot and earn enough money so my mom doesn't need to work anymore. I want her to be able to rest, read books, take care of a garden, do crafts. She deserves to have time to be happy too." These words echoed in Edward's mind for hours. An 8-year-old child already thought about her mother's well-being, already planned to sacrifice her own childhood and youth to repay the love and care she received. What kind of person was he raising? Ryan didn't even know how much his parents worked, how much they sacrificed to maintain the family's standard of living. He lived in a golden bubble where everything simply appeared, without visible effort, without apparent sacrifice. That afternoon, Edward made an unusual decision. He went down to the garden where the children were playing and invited Isabella to have a snack in the formal dining room of the house. The girl hesitated, intimidated by the idea of entering those luxurious environments that she only saw through the glass of the windows, but Edward insisted gently. The Fletcher family's dining room was a spectacle of opulence: noble wood table for 20 people, Austrian crystal chandelier, imported French wallpaper, and a set of Chinese porcelain that was worth more than a popular house. Isabella entered the environment with wide eyes, walking on tiptoe on the Persian carpet, as if she were stepping on sacred ground. Mrs. Carmen served an elaborate snack: toast with various pâtés, exotic fruits artistically cut, natural juices in crystal glasses. Isabella ate with good manners, but Edward noticed her shyness and discomfort in the face of so much formality. "Isabella," he said after they had finished eating, "I would like to meet your mother. Do you think she could come here someday for us to talk?" Isabella was surprised by the request. "Of course, Mr. Edward, but can I ask why? My mom didn't do anything wrong, did she?" Edward smiled at the protective concern of the girl. "On the contrary, I want to meet her because she raised a very special daughter, and I want to thank her personally for the gift you brought to our family." The following night, Connie Sanders appeared at the Fletcher mansion. She arrived by bus after an exhausting day of work, wearing her best outfit, a simple black skirt and a white blouse that had been a gift from one of her employers one Christmas past. Her hair was tied in a simple bun, and she carried a small handbag with some documents, fearful that this summons might be some kind of problem related to her daughter's visits. Edward received her in the less formal living room of the house, instructing Mrs. Carman to serve coffee and some homemade sweets. Connie sat on the edge of the leather armchair, clearly uncomfortable with the refined environment, her calloused hands contrasting with the delicacy of the furniture around her. "Mrs. Sanders," Edward began, "I want you to know that your daughter has been a blessing in our house. Ryan has changed completely since he started playing with Isabella. For the first time in years, I see my son truly happy." Connie relaxed a bit when she realized this wasn't a complaint. "Isabella has always been a special girl," she said with maternal pride. "Since she was little, she worries about others, always wants to help. Sometimes I think she's more mature than many adults out there." Edward nodded. "I noticed that, and I also noticed how much you dedicate yourself to her. Isabella told me about your work routine, about your dreams of giving her a better life." Connie's eyes filled with tears. It was rare for someone to recognize and value her efforts. Most people saw only a poor woman struggling to survive, without perceiving the courage, determination, and love that drove each day of her life. "I have a proposal to make," continued Edward. "I would like for you and Isabella to come live in the guest house at the back of our property. It's a small house but comfortable, with 2 bedrooms, living room, kitchen, and bathroom. In exchange, you could take care of the organization of the main house for a few hours a day. It would be a peaceful job with regular days off and a fair salary." Connie remained silent for several minutes, processing the proposal. It was an incredible opportunity, a chance to give her daughter living conditions she never imagined possible. But it was also a radical change, leaving the neighborhood where she had always lived, the community she knew, the neighbors who helped her in difficult times. "Why are you doing this?" she asked, needing to understand the motivations behind such great generosity. Edward thought carefully about the answer. "Because Isabella taught me something that I had forgotten, that true wealth is in relationships, in genuine love, in the ability to make a difference in people's lives. She gave my son back to me. She gave my family back. How can I repay something like that?" Connie cried. Cried with relief, with gratitude, with hope. For the first time in 8 years, she saw a different future being drawn for her and Isabella. A future where she wouldn't need to work 16 hours a day, where she could see her daughter grow, where Isabella would have opportunities for study and development that she never managed to provide. "I accept," she said with a choked voice. "I accept with much gratitude, but I want you to know that I'll work hard to deserve this opportunity. I'm not one to receive favors for free." Edward smiled. "It's not a favor, Mrs. Sanders. It's a fair exchange. You give me the chance to return a little of what your daughter did for my family." A week later, Connie and Isabella moved into the guest house of the Fletcher mansion. It was a simple place compared to the main house, but for them it represented paradise on earth. Hot water in the shower, a refrigerator that worked, a soft bed, cabinets sufficient for their few clothes, and mainly, the possibility of being together more time. Ryan was on cloud 9. His best friend now lived just a few meters away. They could play every day, have breakfast together, do homework side by side. For the first time in his life, he was experiencing the joy of having a constant companion, someone who shared his discoveries, his fears, his joys. Heather took longer to accept the new family configuration. She viewed with suspicion that break in the established order, that invasion of her exclusive space by people from different social classes. But even she couldn't deny the positive transformation she saw in her son. Ryan was more communicative, happier, more spontaneous. For the first time in years, he ran through the house, laughed loudly, made noise like a normal child. And Edward discovered something new about parenting, about family, about the things that really mattered in life every day. He learned from Isabella and Connie about values he had forgotten amid the rush of business. Simplicity, gratitude, genuine generosity. He was beginning to understand that professional success only made sense when accompanied by personal success. The ability to build solid and loving relationships. The transformation in the Fletcher mansion was visible even to the oldest employees. There were more laughs echoing through the corridors, more animated conversations during meals, more life circulating between those marble walls that for so many years had been cold and silent. 2 children from different worlds had achieved something that all the money in the world hadn't been able to achieve. transform a house into a home. 3 months had passed since Connie and Isabella had moved to the Fletcher property, and the transformation in all family members was impressive. Ryan had become a completely different child, talkative, curious, full of energy and projects. His grades continued to be excellent, but now he studied for his own pleasure, not just out of obligation. He had discovered a taste for reading, especially adventure books, that he later enthusiastically told Isabella about during their afternoons of play. Edward was also changing in ways that he himself hadn't imagined possible. He started coming home earlier, cancelling unnecessary meetings to spend time with his son. He implemented a new routine. Every Friday night was reserved for the family without exceptions. On these occasions, he himself prepared popcorn in the microwave, and they watched movies together in the living room, with Ryan nestled between his parents on the large sofa. Connie had adapted wonderfully to the new life. She worked only 6 hours a day, taking care of the organization of the main house, but with dignity and respect. Edward had insisted that she have a signed contract, health insurance, and all labor rights. For the first time in her adult life, she had free time. She read books borrowed from the mansion's library, took care of a small vegetable garden that Edward had authorized at the back of the property, and sewed beautiful clothes for Isabella on the professional sewing machines he had bought. Heather was the one who showed the most resistance to the changes, although even she began to gradually yield. Initially, she kept her distance from Connie and Isabella, treating them with formal but cold politeness. However, little by little, she began to realize that the presence of the two had brought a peace and harmony to the house that she hadn't experienced in years. It was on a Wednesday afternoon, when Ryan was in his swimming lesson and Edward at an important meeting, that Heather had her first real conversation with Connie. She found her in the laundry folding clothes and on impulse decided to stay and help. "Connie," Heather said hesitantly, "can I ask you a personal question?" "Of course, Mrs. Heather, feel free to speak. How do you manage to be so calm with all this? Change your life overnight. Come to live in a house so different from what you were used to. Don't you miss your previous life?" Connie stopped folding the clothes and looked directly at Heather. It was the first time her employer showed genuine interest in her personal perspective. "Mrs. Heather," she answered with sincerity, "I've worked my whole life dreaming of giving a better opportunity to my daughter. When Mr. Edward offered us this chance, it was as if God had heard my prayers. Of course, I miss some things from the neighborhood, the neighbors, the freedom to be myself without worrying about etiquette. But seeing my Isabella happy, safe, with a guaranteed future, there's no nostalgia worth more than that." Heather remained silent, processing these words. For the first time, she began to understand what really motivated that woman. A maternal love so deep that she was capable of any sacrifice for the good of her daughter. "And you? If I may ask," continued Connie with delicacy, "are you happy with these changes in the house?" Heather sighed deeply. "To be honest, at the beginning I was bothered. I was used to our privacy, our routines, but I can't deny that Ryan is happier than I've ever seen in his entire life. And Edward is different too. More present, more human, if I can say so." "Mr. Edward is a good man," said Connie. "He just needed to remember what really matters. Sometimes we get lost in the midst of so much rush and forget to look at what is most precious beside us." These conversations became frequent. Heather began to seek Connie's company, discovering in her a life wisdom that she didn't find in her high society friends. Connie, in turn, helped Heather see her own family with different eyes, to value simple moments that previously went unnoticed. Meanwhile, the friendship between Ryan and Isabella continued to flourish. They had developed their own rituals. Every morning they had breakfast together in the kitchen, while Connie prepared lunch. In the afternoon, after Ryan finished his private lessons, they played in the garden or explored corners of the property. Isabella had become the confidant of all Ryan's secrets, and he was the patient listener to all her dreams and plans for the future. One afternoon, however, something unexpected happened. Isabella was quieter than usual, and Ryan noticed that she seemed worried about something. "You're strange today," he observed as they played at building castles with the toy bricks that Edward had bought especially for their afternoon of fun. "Did something happen?" Isabella hesitated before answering. "Ryan, can I tell you something? But you have to promise it will stay just between the two of us." I promise. You can tell me. Isabella took a deep breath. Last night I heard my mom talking on the phone with Mrs. Nora from the neighborhood. She was crying and telling about how our life changed, about how you and your family were generous to us. But then she said something that got me thinking. What? She said that sometimes she wonders if we deserve all this, if we're not living a dream that could end at any moment. And then I got scared, Ryan, afraid that one day you'll get tired of us and we'll have to go back to the shack. Ryan felt his heart tighten. He had never thought about this, never imagined that Isabella and Connie might live with this constant insecurity. For him, they were already part of the family, essential to everyone's happiness in the house. Isabella, he said seriously, that will never happen. You're my best friend, my sister of the heart. My dad always says that you saved our family. Why would he want you to leave? But Isabella's words planted a seed of concern in Ryan's heart. That night during dinner, he closely observed the family dynamics, trying to detect signs that his parents might be getting tired of Connie and Isabella's presence. He found nothing concrete, but doubt had been planted. Edward noticed the change in his son's behavior. Ryan was quieter, more observant, as if he were analyzing every word, every gesture of the adults around him. After dinner, Edward called him for a private conversation in the office. "Ryan, I noticed that you're different today. Did something happen?" The boy hesitated. He had promised Isabella that he would keep the secret, but the concern was consuming his tranquility. He decided to tell his father, trusting in his newly discovered emotional proximity. "Dad, will Isabella and Mrs. Connie have to leave someday?" The question caught Edward by surprise. "Why are you asking that?" Ryan told about the conversation that Isabella had overheard, about the fears and insecurities that she and her mother carried. Edward listened to everything attentively, feeling a mixture of sadness and determination growing in his chest. "Ryan," he said firmly, "I want you to listen carefully to what I'm going to say. Isabella and Mrs. Connie are not temporary guests in our house. They are part of our family now, and family is not abandoned, not left behind. If it were up to me, they would stay here forever." "If it were up to just you?" Edward realized he had said more than he intended. The truth was that Heather, although she had gradually become fond of the presence of the two, still hadn't positioned herself clearly about a permanent stay. Conversations between the couple on the subject were always postponed, as if both were avoiding facing a decision that could generate conflict. "Your father is right, Ryan." Both turned and saw Heather standing in the office doorway. She entered and closed the door behind her, her face serious but not hostile. "I was looking for you to talk about exactly that," she continued. "This afternoon I had a long conversation with Connie. She told me about her insecurities, about the fears that you mentioned, and that made me reflect on many things." Edward and Ryan waited in silence, tense. "At the beginning," continued Heather, "I confess that I saw their presence as an intrusion into our private life. I was used to our standards, our privacy, our routine. But in the last few months I realized something that I'm ashamed to admit. I didn't truly know my own family." She approached Ryan and knelt before him, placing her hands on his shoulders. "My son, I spent years of your life worrying about appearances, about social status, about what others would think. And in that process, I almost lost what matters most, you. Isabella gave me back my son, just as she gave my husband back to me. How could I want her and her mother to leave?" Tears began to roll down Heather's face. It was the first time in years that she showed her emotions in such an open and vulnerable way. "I want you to know," she continued, "that Isabella and Connie will always have a place in our home and in our family. Not as employees or guests, but as part of us. If they want, of course." Ryan jumped from the sofa and hugged his mother with a strength that she hadn't received in a long time. Edward approached and enveloped both in his arms, forming the most genuine family hug they had shared in years. The next day, Edward made a decision that surprised everyone. He called an informal family meeting in the garden of the house, including Connie and Isabella. When everyone was gathered under the shade of the big tree where it all began, he stood up and cleared his throat. "I would like to share something important with you," he began. In the last few months, our family has gone through a profound transformation. We've learned about love, about true values, about what it really means to be happy. And that transformation was only possible thanks to two very special people. He looked directly at Connie and Isabella. Connie, Isabella, you not only found a place in our house, you found a place in our hearts, and that's why Heather and I would like to make an official proposal. The atmosphere became tense with expectation. We would like you to stay with us permanently, not as employees or dependents, but as family. We want to formalize this union in a way that guarantees security and dignity for both of you. Connie put her hands to her face, too emotional to speak. Isabella looked at her mother, then at Ryan, then at Edward and Heather. What does that mean exactly? Asked Connie when she managed to recover her voice. It means, answered Edward, that we want to adopt Isabella as our daughter, if you agree. She would be Ryan's legal sister, a legitimate heir to our assets, an official part of the Fletcher family. And you, Connie, would be not just our employee, but our relative, someone who will always have financial and emotional security by our side. The silence that followed was charged with emotion. Isabella looked at Ryan, who was smiling from ear to ear, clearly approving of the idea. She looked at Heather, who nodded encouragingly. Finally, she looked at her mother. "Mom," she said, with a trembling voice. "What do you think?" Connie cried. Cried with joy, with gratitude, with relief. For 8 years she had struggled alone to give the best to her daughter, many times doubting if she could provide the opportunities that Isabella deserved. Now she saw all her prayers being answered in a way she had never dared to dream. "If that's what you want, my daughter," she said, hugging Isabella, "then that's what we'll do. This family has given us more love in 3 months than many people receive in a lifetime." Isabella got up and ran to hug Ryan. "We're going to be real siblings," she exclaimed. "Siblings forever." "Forever," confirmed Ryan, and for the first time in his life he felt that he really understood the meaning of the word family. Edward and Heather looked at each other, knowing that they were making the most important decision of their lives. They were not only changing the destiny of Connie and Isabella, but they were completing their own family in a way they had never imagined possible. A poor girl from the periphery had taught a rich family from the Los Angeles elite that true love has no social class, has no price, and knows no barriers when it finds hearts ready to receive it. 6 months later, on a sunny Saturday morning, the Fletcher mansion was the scene of a celebration that had never happened before within those solemn walls. It wasn't a pompous business event or a high society party. It was something much more significant: the formalization of the adoption of Isabella Sanders as Isabella Sanders Anderson Fletcher. The legal process had been complex but rewarding. Edward hired the best lawyers in the country to ensure that everything was done in the most dignified and secure way possible. Connie maintained her legal guardianship over her daughter, but now Isabella also had Edward and Heather as legal parents, with all the rights and protections that implied. The party was small and intimate, exactly as the family had decided. Only the people who really mattered were present: Mrs. Carmen and other employees who had become dear friends, Mrs. Nora, who had insisted on coming from East Los Angeles to witness the happiness of her former neighbor, and some close colleagues of Edward, who had become true friends of the family over the years. Ryan, now 9 years old, was unrecognizable. The sad and lonely boy who cried hidden in the bathroom had transformed into a confident, talkative, and energetic boy. He wore elegant formal clothes, but his eyes shone with the genuine joy of someone who had finally found his place in the world. Isabella was dazzling in a light blue dress that Heather had chosen especially for the occasion. It wasn't too extravagant, but had the simple elegance that perfectly matched the girl's personality. Her hair was tied in a delicate hairstyle, ornamented with a small tiara that had been a gift from Heather. Connie wore a dress that she herself had sewn on one of the machines that Edward had bought for her. It was a simple model, but impeccably executed, and she was radiant with pride and happiness. During all those months, she had transformed not only physically, but emotionally. The constant tiredness had given way to a deep serenity, and she radiated the peace of someone who could finally sleep peacefully, knowing that her daughter would have a secure future. The most emotional moment of the celebration was when Edward stood up to make a speech. He had prepared for weeks writing and rewriting his words, but when the time came to speak, he decided to simply follow his heart. "Friends," he began, his voice slightly choked, "a year ago, if someone had told me that my life would change completely because of an 8-year-old girl asking for a glass of water, I would have thought that person was crazy. But life has its mysterious ways of teaching us lessons that we need to learn." He looked directly at Isabella, who smiled shyly, still not completely accustomed to being the center of attention. "Isabella, you came to our house as a visitor, but won our hearts as a daughter. You taught a man obsessed with business that the greatest wealth is in relationships. You taught a woman concerned with appearances that true beauty comes from the heart. And you gave back to a lonely boy the joy of being a child." Ryan approached Isabella and held her hand, a simple gesture but laden with meaning. "But what impresses me most," continued Edward, "is that you did all this without losing your essence, your simplicity, your natural generosity. You didn't become arrogant with comfort. You didn't forget your origins. You didn't lose compassion for those less fortunate." It was true. In the months following the move, Isabella had convinced the family to establish a scholarship program for underprivileged children from her old school. Every month, Edward allocated a significant portion of the company's profits to finance school supplies, uniforms, and food for dozens of children from the periphery. "And Connie," Edward turned to Isabella's mother, "you taught us about dignity, about true maternal love, about female strength. You showed that richness of character is worth more than material wealth." "Always." Connie wiped a tear from her face. "Too emotional to respond. That's why," concluded Edward, "today we are not just celebrating a legal adoption. We are celebrating the completeness of a family that, without you two, would never be truly complete." After the speech, Heather stood up and did something that surprised everyone. She took from her neck a diamond necklace that she had worn since her wedding, a family jewel worth a fortune, and carefully placed it around Isabella's neck. "This necklace," she said with an emotional voice, "belonged to my grandmother, then to my mother, then to me. It has always been passed from mother to oldest daughter. And now, Isabella, it is yours, not because you are the oldest daughter biologically, but because you are the one who brought our family back to life." Isabella touched the necklace with reverence, feeling the weight not only of the precious stones, but of the responsibility and love they represented. "I will always take care of it," she promised, "and one day I will pass it to my daughter," telling the story of how a family learned that true love has no boundaries. Ryan then approached and gave Isabella a gift that he himself had prepared, a photo album with all the important moments they had shared since the first meeting. On the first page was pasted the original drawing that she had given him that first day, now carefully framed. "So that we never forget where our friendship began," he said, "and to remember that some of the best things in life start in a simple way." The party continued until late afternoon, with soft music, warm conversations, and many laughs. There was no excessive pomp or ostentation, just the genuine warmth of people who truly loved each other, celebrating a special moment. When the sun began to set, tinting the sky with orange and pink hues, the family gathered in the garden where it all began. They sat in the same shade of the tree where Isabella and Ryan had met. But now there were 5 people: Edward, Heather, Ryan, Isabella, and Connie, united by bonds that went far beyond biology or law. "You know what I sometimes think?" said Isabella, observing the sunset. "I think that God had a plan from the beginning. He knew that Ryan needed a friend, that Mr. Edward needed to rediscover his family, that Mrs. Heather needed to find her heart, and that my mom and I needed an opportunity. And he brought us all together at the right moment." Edward reflected on these words. Indeed, it seemed unlikely that so many coincidences would result in such a profound and positive transformation. Perhaps there really were greater forces working to unite people who needed each other. "And you know what's the most incredible part of all this?" added Ryan. "It's that it began with something so simple, you asking for a glass of water. It shows that we never know how a small gesture can change everything." Heather smiled, remembering how she had initially resisted these changes. "I learned that sometimes you need to leave your comfort zone to find true happiness, that the best gifts in life come wrapped in ways that we don't immediately recognize." Connie, who had remained silent, observing that family that was now hers as well, finally spoke. I always taught Isabella that life is full of surprises, some good and others not so much. But now I can teach her that the best surprises are those that involve love, generosity, and the courage to open your heart to people different from us. When the stars began to appear in the dark sky, they were still there talking about dreams, plans for the future, happy memories. Ryan and Isabella made a list of all the adventures they wanted to live together, traveling to know different places in the United States, learning new languages, maybe one day taking a trip to know other countries. Edward promised that he would support all the dreams of the two, no matter how ambitious they were. He had discovered that investing in the dreams of his children was much more rewarding than any business success. That night, when everyone had already retired, Isabella stayed awake a little longer in her new room, which was now decorated with elegant furniture, but maintained her unique personality. On the wall beside the bed was framed the original drawing she had made for Ryan, next to a photo of the whole family gathered during the adoption celebration. She looked through the window at the guest house where she had lived with her mother and smiled, remembering all the journey that had brought them there. She took a paper and began to draw again, as she always did when she wanted to record an important moment. This time she drew a big house with many illuminated windows and 5 figures in front, all holding hands, surrounded by colorful flowers and a sky full of stars. Below the drawing, she wrote with her still childish handwriting, "My family," where I learned that true love transforms everything and that sometimes the best treasures are found in the hearts of the people we least expect. And so, a story that began with the physical thirst of a poor child was transformed into a journey about the emotional thirst that all human beings carry, the need to love and be loved, to belong, to make a difference in other people's lives. Isabella Sanders, now Isabella Sanders Anderson Fletcher, had found much